welcome everyone. It's nice to see old friends and some brand new friends. Who has who's here for the very first time in Geshe Norbu? Amazing. Thank you for coming. So I'm not sure what to say, so I'll start with just some obvious practical things like please turn off your phone. There's a fire exit over there if disaster is to strike, and Um, there's bathrooms at the door or at the back, sorry, in the room, and there will be a short break somewhere in the middle if you need those. And then I just also want to say something briefly about what this place is. So it's called the Geshe Norbu Mind Training Center, and we started. It's just a year and a half ago. We're part of there are centers all around the world in this tradition, which was started by the great lamas. Lama Geshe and Lama Sopa Rinpoche. And the whole idea about a half an hour. So I think now there's sound, but that doesn't matter because Geshe was got.
Now you do.
Now I do. Yeah.
Yes, now you do.
There yeah. So welcome. So for me, first time in Sweden. So also first time in Stockholm, of course. So yeah, I don't speak any Swedish, so we have to try to convey everything in English. So most of you speak English, I think. Most people in Sweden actually do, yeah. So yeah, to make it easy for both of us. Then, yeah, what we're going to talk about this weekend, and today, like a little bit kind of introduction to the weekend. It was announced as mind training and love and kindness and reality, right? So we were going to start with the basics, yeah, in order to understand things about reality and to understand things about love and kindness. It's very important to get a little bit understanding about the mind and its functions and the processes. So to say Buddhist psychology, or that in relation to Western psychology, we can relate it back and forth. And yeah, as a traditional kind of structure in Buddhist kind of mind science or philosophy or psychology, then we read sometimes prayers in the beginning and in the end, you know, as but yeah, maybe today we can skip that, maybe, I was thinking, because today is maybe more or less introduction of the introduction. So then some people are totally new, yeah, so that's why, yeah, then people can ask questions, why all these prayers? There's great meanings behind those prayers, but maybe we can talk about that tomorrow and the day after. So what we're going to talk about is basically a kind of mind science, yeah. Buddhism is not really kind of a religion as such. Yeah, it's a kind of way of life and based on understanding the mind. Yeah, so that's why His Holiness Dalai Lama prefers the term mind science. Yeah, so yeah, actually what it says, the science of the mind. And if we study the science of the mind in Buddhist psychology or philosophy, then actually we come down to a very precise kind of understanding of how our mind functions. And that goes along with to achieve, basically. That's the Buddha's idea was not just to become a scientist. That was not his main motivation. Yeah, so the Buddha, yeah, his mind science, his philosophy, his psychology was meant to stop suffering of sentient beings, right? So why? Because all sentient beings, without exception, want happiness and don't want suffering. So all of you here have the same wish, right? When we sometimes a bit sick, can be physical sickness or mental difficulty in life, yeah, then what happens is that we're going to want to get rid of that kind of period as soon as possible, right? We don't say, oh, let's be sick for another day or two, unless you want to have an excuse not to go to the office or something like that, then maybe a different story. But generally speaking, innate, we have this kind of strong wish not wanting suffering or not wanting difficulties. And we also have this innate wish to want happiness. If we wake up, we had a good dream or something, and you wake up happily, then you want to keep that feeling, right? So as soon as you meet the daily activities and you lose that feeling, you get a kind of little bit uncomfortable. So that's a sign that we all want kind of happiness and don't like suffering, right? So that's one of the first kind of things the Buddha found out. And then the next question was, how can we create that to come into being, right? So that's a very important step to understand our mind and to understand how can we create kind of causes for happiness and eliminate suffering. Because to understand the mind or the interdependence about different aspects of mind science, it's kind of a law of reality, yeah? How our mind creates destructive emotions as such, yeah? And how actually we can oppose those destructive emotions with powerful minds like emotional intelligence. And we can train our mind. It is possible to achieve more qualities of mind. It's possible to eliminate destructive emotions to a certain extent, yeah? As we know, that's even possible with more severe form of mental disorders, yeah, by the power of mental force or by the power our attitudes, we can change. Yeah? So there's different reasons for that to come into being. And that's we're going to talk about a little bit about that aspect of Buddhist psychology. Yeah? So it follows similar kind of steps as we find in other forms of psychology in not Buddhist related aspects of the mind, yeah, like self-awareness, self-discipline, and then empathy, compassion. So in modern times, it gets more and more people getting interested in these aspects of mind science. Why? Because it seems to work. Yeah, there's many scientific kind of research has been done about aspects of emotional intelligence, for example. Yeah, so if you, for example, read the books of Daniel Coleman, who's a very famous writer regarding this subject, and you can see there's a lot of proof of different kind of projects that actually proves the benefits of dealing with the mind. Yeah, so what is the difference between mind and brain activity? Yeah, so there's also an aspect. The Buddha didn't really talk much about neuroscience. Yeah, the Buddha was only interested in consciousness. So in modern forms of neuroscience, there's a new field that relates to the mind-brain problem, or the correlation between consciousness and brain activity. Yeah, so that's a lot of things to be said as that as well. So then, in order to understand that our mind can be changed, and to understand we have a kind of unwanted kind of displeasure of these destructive emotions, right? So that's kind of a cause for suffering to arise. Yeah? So we can see in daily life that destructive emotions like anger, anxiety, fear, attachment actually causes the mind to get disturbed, right? And the causes the mind to get disturbed, and that disturbance is not in accordance with reality. Yeah, so most of the conceptualizations we build up based on a moment of agitation or something like that is based on kind of overestimating a particular fault of an object. For example, a person with a depression walks out in, let's say, not today, but let's say a sunny day in Stockholm, right? So a person with depression, with the glasses of depression, yeah, sees Stockholm in a very unhappy kind of world. Right? So then next to that person is a person very optimistic in life and sees Stockholm as a beautiful place. Right? So Stockholm actually at that time is the same. It's not that it's depressing or happy. It's neither of those, right? So it's just made up by the minds of the person perceiving this world. Yeah? So that you can see a lot of things depends on the mind. Yeah? So that way we have to have a kind of mind training, and mind training, first of all, in getting the knowledge, and then applying that knowledge in contemplation to think about it. Yeah? So in order to train the mind in that particular aspect, first we have to have what is called self-awareness, right? So without this self-awareness, it's very difficult to get a correct understanding of what the mind's all about. And so compared to, I don't know Sweden very well, but when I was young, I used to go to the Alps, Austria and Switzerland, the mountains and the lakes. And then sometimes in the early morning, the lake is like a mirror, right? You can see the sky, the blue sky and the clouds and the mountains. Everything is reflecting in that lake, which is perfectly quiet. But then when you go to the ocean, or I remember when I was young, went onto a boat on the North Sea, there's a sea between England and the Netherlands. And then it's very disrupting waves, you can compare it to, the winds of our destructive emotions that actually causes the mind to get disturbed. Yeah? So nothing reflects in that particular lake. Yeah? So there's no knowledge about what's going on in the mind. And so most people in society, because of these kind of destructive emotions, it's very difficult to actually know what's going on inside the mind. Yeah? There's no self-awareness as such. And it's also true in the minds of criminals, yeah, or people who commit a crime. Similar thing. They're not in control. They don't know their mind. And that's why being overpowered by destructive emotion, they can get into even physical or verbal activities. And why is that so? Because every physical or verbal activity we engage in is preceded by mental activity or an intention or a motivation, right? So in Bangalore also we have a Buddhist center, and we do a lot of social services in that center as well. And also we give talks in the center prison in Bangalore, which has about 4,000 inmates. It's a very different prison than an average prison in the West. An average prison in the West, you see a lot of armed police. Yeah? So in that prison in Bangalore, the first time I went, I was a bit kind of uncomfortable, because going into a prison in a country like India. But actually, after entering the gates, beyond the gates, then it was actually very peaceful. I mean, the feeling was quite peaceful. There was only a few policemen walking around with a stick. I don't know if people have been to India before, but in India there's kind of more respect for the police than in the West, I think. But yeah, so in the prison also we give talks, and then one of the inmates is kind of, he's there for murder, so he's a murderer, right? But if you meet him in person, he's not that kind of a bad guy. Right? So he is a very nice person to talk to. If you didn't label this person as a murderer and bad person, and you just talk with him, it seems to be a very nice guy. Yeah? So this person actually told us that he's there for murder. He's there sitting now for, I think, 12 years. And he actually said himself, he said, for 10, 15 minutes, I was not in control. I made a mistake. So you can see by the power of a destructive emotion, like anger in this case, he committed the crime of murder. Very interesting. So then you can see that many things in society and in our personal life depends a lot about the mind. Yeah? So many aspects of the mind. So we have to get more knowledge of the mind if we want to change, right? This center is here for people to get the information. Yeah? If you want to change or not, that's your own kind of business, so to say. So we give you the opportunities, right? If you think what I'm talking about or what people talk about here is beneficial, you can use it. If you think it's not really beneficial, you can put it aside. There's no issue. Yeah, and also we're not here there to make people Buddhist or something like that. Yeah? Conversion is not really what we're into. We're here to help people to understand more about the mind. Yeah? So even in Tushita Dharmasala, we also have a center high up in the mountains. And I'm not very high up, but a little bit up in the mountains. And yeah, there's all kind of new youngsters come for, travel the world and, try to be happy kind of thing. So they also come to the course. And there's some people, even a lot of people from Israel. And actually after the course, some people say, oh, after this course, I understand my own religion much better than before. You see? So then our job is done. Right? So that's kind of, the kind of aspect we like to. So that's also here, try to examine what we talk about. It's very important. The whole system in Buddhist philosophy is based on logic. It's based on analyzing if it's true or not, and what are the possibilities and where to choose from, and what's the best approximation to reality, so to say. So, Anyway, so go back to this kind of self-awareness, right? So like this lake in the mountains in the Alps, right, where everything reflects. So if you have a mind quite like that, then you can analyze what's going on. And then you can help your mind to be changed, right? If you don't have that awareness of knowing on what's going on inside, I do like this, but it's not only the brain. But anyway, so whatever is going on in the mind, if you don't really see that, you can never change, right? So then you get in this kind of emotional hijack. We're overpowered by depression, overpowered by anxiety, or distraction. Many people, they're so distracted, and then it's very difficult to understand the mind. And some people even make the comment, oh, my life is going so well because I have a lot of distractions. Some people say that, so that means that people actually look for escape, or look for something to go out of the problem instead of solving the problem. So that's happens quite often. We all like to do that. Escape when you're unhappy, watch a movie or something. But actually watching a movie is not going to make you happier. It's just a temporary distraction. So that's unfortunately happening, especially in modern society. And in London, if I go in the underground, and then you see people sitting there in the metro, and their mind is inside the phone. It looks like their mind is, even if you walk past, they don't really notice you're passing by. Their mind is inside the phone. So that means that the mind is so distracted from early morning. Some people they live with a phone. They sleep with a phone. So people are because of the so many distractions. So there was research to be done, was a few years ago in Scientific American kind of published that people couldn't really sit still on a chair in a room with nothing inside. No phone, no internet, nothing to get distracted, you know, just sitting there on the chair for 10 or 15 minutes. Some people find it very difficult. And it was very shocking that that research also said that some people actually rather have a kind of slight electric shock in the leg than dealing with their own mind. Very, very, very sad. The women did a bit better than the men in that research, but yeah, it's a very sad kind of aspect of the mind. Yeah? So, because if you learn to be aware of your own mind, if you learn to change your mind, then there's more happiness. Right? Because happiness cannot be found outside. Because if the happiness could be found outside, then many people who are very wealthy and very famous, they must be so happy. You know? But that's unfortunately not the case. So also people who go on world trips, you know, they save some money and then think, okay, let's go on a world trip, you know, find happiness. And they go to one place, they get bored, of course, after some time. They go to another place, get bored, go to another place, get bored. Then 1 year later, actually, they found out that their mind is still the same, but the external conditions, they change, right? But so that means that if external conditions only will bring happiness, then those people should accomplish happiness, or drugs, or parties, you know. Yeah, I tried many things when I was young, before I became a Buddhist, or even before walking around like this. As a university student in the Netherlands, also, you know, you do all kinds of things in life that you think is going to make you happy, you know, go to all night long parties and yeah, using luckily no hardcore drugs, but you know, you try to look for means that gives you satisfaction in life, right? You like to look for things that makes you happy. But actually, if external factors or drugs or money or fame was the real cause of happiness, then the more you will engage in those activities, the happier you should become. That's not the case. There's many people who are very famous, very wealthy, but very miserable, you know. So then they have to depend on drugs because that's the only thing they can distract the mind and kind of a little bit of kind of peace they never had before, right? So yeah, it's very sad. Yeah. So anyway, so then we can see that the happiness is not depending on the external world. The happiness can depend upon the inner world. Yeah? So another example, in Dharamsala, there's a place called Baksu. There's a kind of a place where all the hippies, I mean, there's still kind of a hippie scene in that area who have parties and, you know, use a little bit of drugs here and there, and, you know, and try to make the best out of life as they can in their view, right? So then, one point of time, they meet His Holiness Dalai Lama and they say, oh, this person doesn't go to parties, he doesn't take drugs, you know, and he seems to be such a happy human being. So that's a sign that what His Holiness Dalai Lama does is mind training, right? So because happiness is a mental state, right? It's a feeling. Yeah, we have neutral feeling, unpleasant feeling, pleasant feelings. So that's a mental state. And mind is consciousness is momentary changing. That means that if you understand how the mind is within this kind of law of nature of what is the cause for happiness and what is the cause for suffering, there's not that the Buddha invented that kind of causality within the consciousness, right? It's the nature of our mind, right? So a destructive emotion like anger, anxiety, jealousy, pride, yeah, disturbs the mind. You lose the peace of mind. Yeah? So that's its nature. And we all can experience the same thing. Yeah? But if you apply the antidotes, then it's possible to actually achieve more happiness, right? So that's not that the Buddha invented that. The Buddha just did research about how the mind functions and came to the conclusion this is the nature of the mind. We cannot change that fire, for example, is hot and burning, right? We cannot change. Or on the quantum level, there's this kind of law of quantum mechanics. We cannot change that law of quantum mechanics. We can only observe it and act according to that law in order to come to particular kind of probabilities, how we can predict a future event, right? So for our mind, the same thing. It's not that that's kind of nature how our mind functions. So if we apply the right research regarding our mind, we can play with that kind of law, right? So that law is an existing phenomenon, And if you understand that law well, you can you can create cause for happiness and eliminate cause for suffering. It's kind of in Tibetan, they say, Tendal Drik means kind of organizing dependent origination. Yeah, like in external conditions, we know that if there's a seed, and I put a seed on the table, nothing will happen. But if I put a seed with soil and fertilization, heat, moisture, it will grow, right? So that's the nature of the external law of cause and effect, right? That's we all. It's not that we can change that law, but we can play with the conditions. We can cause that seed to sprout and to grow into a plant. Yeah? So we can play with the conditions, with external conditions. But the law for the nature of cause and effect of that seed to grow in a plant, that's not in our hands. It's only we can play with conditions to let it come about or prevent it, right? So our mind, same thing. It's like an inner law of cause and effect, or inner law of reality. Yeah, we have to, we can deal with, and we can understand. If you understand that aspect well, then you create the right causes, and results come about. You know, that's be proven. And the first step in that aspect is kind of self-awareness, because if you're not really aware what's going on inside your own mind, it's very difficult to change it, right? If you not really know what's going on, if you don't really know the problem, how do you gonna solve the problem? Yeah, so there's different kind of techniques based on generating this kind of self-awareness, and then from self-awareness to kind of self-discipline. So the first step is to get your mind aware of what's going on, and a very important process to that is kind of concentration. If you learn to concentrate your mind to on a particular object, yeah, you cut all kind of distractions, or you cut kind of destructive emotions or disturbing kind of thoughts. Yeah, so the more you are in control of cutting destructive emotions or disturbing thoughts, the more kind of the nature of the mind comes, and the more kind of the neutral state of the mind comes, yeah, which is without these afflictions. Yeah, so the afflictions or destructive emotions, so to say, they're just temporarily there. Yeah, it's like clouds in the sky, and the blue sky is always there, right? So the clouds are not an innate part of the blue sky, right? They're just obscuring the blue sky. So our destructive emotions, the same way, they're just obscuring the blue sky. And so that means that if you take away those clouds, then only blue sky is left, right? So same with our destructive emotions. If you take away these kind of negative thoughts or disturbing thoughts, yeah, that we classify as afflictions or destructive emotions, then only peace of mind is left. Yeah, so that's a kind of technique we like to accomplish. So the first step is kind of this kind of self-awareness, to be aware, like this lake in the Alps, what's going on inside the mind, like a mirror. Yeah, without that, it's very difficult to change the mind. Yeah? If you don't know first the problem, same as the Buddha said, if you don't know the nature of the problem, then it's very difficult to eliminate it. Right? Same in ordinary life. If you have a problem and we don't know how to, how it came about and how actually what is nature, then it's very difficult to eliminate it, yeah? To get rid of it. So same if you're sick, you go to a doctor and you analyze the sickness. Yeah? Next step is the cause of the sickness. So if the cause of sickness has been examined, then next step, is it possible to get cured or not? That's the next question, right? And after that, the methods for the cure, for the process to get cured, right? So for us, same thing. First, we have to analyze the problem. Yeah, so the problem of our things in life are founded in this kind of destructive emotions, as we call it, right? So we have to analyze how do those destructive emotions come up, how do they abide, how do they disintegrate, and how can we tackle them, how can we prevent them from coming into being. Yeah, so that's kind of technique. So for that to happen, first we need kind of self-awareness. Yeah, we need kind of self-awareness, which can be acquired by concentrating on an object, and training your mind to focus on the object and to cut every form of other thought not related to only focusing on the object. Yeah? So they can be thinking about past and future, or thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow, or negative thoughts or that disturbs your mind. Yeah? So those kind of things you learn how to trigger. Yeah? So this kind of self-awareness then builds up a kind of self-discipline. Yeah? You come in control. So there's kind of few mental factors we're going to talk about. Maybe we do a short meditation today also, then you get a little bit of feel how it actually works. Yeah. So this kind of process of training the mind and subduing the mind is actually quite well researched in people with mental disorders, yeah, and for example in the OCD, or the obsessive compulsive disorder kind of issue, yeah. So that's been examined, that if you train in what's being called Jeffrey Schwartz, he did a lot of interesting research regarding obsessive compulsive disorder, and then you can actually see, very interesting, from scientific research, yeah, it's not a Buddhist kind of teaching, but it's very related. So that's very, because I have a kind of little bit of a scientific background before I came to Buddhism, so that's for me always still for me very interesting to read the scientific researches behind related subjects about psychology. So there's very interesting research that actually proves what Jeffrey Schwartz did, that we have consciousness, right? And we have a physical brain. Yeah? So as Buddhists, we say consciousness is different from brain. Yeah? Consciousness is not a physical thing, right? Like our brain. Yeah? But there's a correlation between the two. So that's been examined by people like Richard Davison and many others, how the mind actually influences the brain. Yeah? If you train your mind, you can even train your brain. Yeah? Neuroplasticity. So it's been proven over the last, 10, 20 years. So that proves that you can change, if you change your mind, you can change the brain. So if you can change the physical brain with a thinking process, right, an analytical process, then of course you can change the mind, right? So this actually proves, Jeffrey Schwartz, very interesting research regarding this OCD problem. He was a medical doctor, and he saw that conventional kind of medication didn't really work. So he used the kind of these techniques of what he calls the power of mental force or the power of mental attention, which are the same mental factors in Buddhism. We talk about how to actually control the mind. And so he learns his patients to train in these aspects of mind training and not to follow particular negative thoughts, like I have to wash my hands now, right? So he trains his patients in understanding that you can change. So instead of following that particular thought, the neurotransmitters being released, so we have to follow that thought, oh, I have washed my hands now. So he learns them not to listen to that, but concentrate on something else, like washing your hands. Or sorry, like going in the garden, for example, yeah? Go to see the flowers. It's very interesting, and how actually our mind influences the brain, and the brain on its own side influences the mind. Yeah, so it's very interesting phenomenon by Leonardo DiCaprio, one of the famous actors. So he played a movie called The Aviator. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's very interesting because before the filming, he didn't really have this OCD problem as such. Then during the filming for a few months, he had to act in an OCD patient, in the role of an OCD patient. So he has to train his mind, oh, now I have to act like this. And he has to think, oh, now I have to act like this. So that you can see there's a mental kind of intention, right? How he has to act in the movie. Right? So that actually causes, after a few months, very funny story in one way, but very interesting as well. So how he actually in a few months' time got an OCD problem himself by thinking, oh, now I have to act like this, now I have to act like that. So after the screening, he got this OCD problem, and then Jeffrey Schwartz had to help him to get rid of it. So it's very interesting that initially there's kind of mental activity, what we call it from consciousness, right? I have to act like this, I have to act like that. So that causes his brain to change, and the more neurotransmitters being released of now you have to wash your hands, so now you're acting this way, right? So that means that this kind of consciousness actually changed the brain, right? Then after that, he got this OCD problem, meaning that while having that kind of, mental disorder, then there's first the release of neurotransmitters that force you to think in a particular way. So that's first brain activity, and consciousness follows, right? Very interesting, So then he had this OCD problem, and later on, Jeffrey Schwartz helped him to get rid of it by training in these kind of mental factors. Training in this kind of, it's very interesting. I find very interesting because we study these things for, it's like very traditional program back to the time of the Buddha. It's like 2,500 year old kind of philosophy and mind science, right? So some people think, that's kind of old school. Now we have new findings in science. We have to follow that. But actually, if you see findings in science, when it's talked about mind science, psychology, mind-brain relationships, right? Or the mind-brain problem, or even on the level of quantum mechanics. There's a lot of similarities between mind science and Buddhism and philosophy with regards to the law of relativity in the quantum, on the quantum level. It's very interesting that also the Buddha 2,500 years ago and many scholars after that actually talk about very similar things. So there's people in the field of quantum physics who read this kind of matter, this kind of text of Arya Nagarjuna, for example, great Indian master, and then say, oh, that's very special. That's especially in the quantum theory of the uncertainty principle, that the observer influence actually what's been observed. Yeah, for example, if you look for an electron, where is the electron depends on where the observer is looking, right? So that aspect of the dependence of the mind perceiving something and what is being perceived already has been discussed like 2,500 years ago. Very interesting. Yeah, so anyway, this is not my sales talk for Buddhism, but it's just because I have a scientific background, so I always want to see for myself, to see what does science say and how does that relate with Buddhist mind science and philosophy. Anyway, so we go back to this kind of self-awareness. Yeah, without that kind of understanding the mind is very difficult. So that's why you probably maybe hear, I don't know. So that's a sign that you hear that you have a little bit kind of understanding what's going on inside the mind. Otherwise, you would rather be somewhere else in I don't know all the places to go out in Stockholm, but some probably many places to to spend your time in the evening. So you came here for a particular purpose, yeah. So that's very rare, because most people in this world they're not really interested in this matter, this kind of matter. Some people even think, what we're doing here is we lost it or something, because some people are not really interested in these kind of matters, because their life is distracted enough, so they don't really think, they cannot really cope what's inside. Yeah, so that's why we first have to have this kind of self-awareness. That's a very initial point of mind training. Without self-awareness, it's very difficult to progress. Yeah, so that's the first step, and we can talk about it a little more. And then after that, we have this kind of self-discipline. Yeah, but in this case of the OCD, for example, it's a very kind of just a very one short aspect of mind training, how you actually can learn to train your mind not to follow negative thoughts, right? So how to train your mind in other levels of reality, because most things, as I said before, the things we perceive is not always in accordance with reality. It's many things are mentally fabricated. Yeah? So for destructive emotion like anger, for example, it's like 80%, even according to certain psychologists, it's like 80% of what people perceive is mentally fabricated. And it's also true for people with anxiety problems, right? Or fear or depression. It's like the majority of how people think the world exists is just mentally fabricated. It's not reality. So because of not being reality, there's a sign that that mind is not a constructive way of thinking. So the more you know about reality, the more actually the mind perceives reality, the more actually happiness is being achieved. So if the mind is at peace, if the mind can see reality as it is, without this kind of mental fabrication, then there's much more peace of mind. And so, so that's a few things we have to, we're going to talk about. So that has to do with kind of the self-discipline. Yeah? So in order to understand the destructive emotions well, by the power of self-awareness, how they're about, how they come up, how they go away, we learn about the mind. Yeah? That's kind of mind science. Then also we have to see that those destructive emotions are the cause of the problem. Yeah? So they're the cause for the mind to become unhappy, right? And they're the cause for problems in society. As I see my friend in the prison in Bangalore, it's like, because of being in this emotional hijack of anger, right? Then he committed a crime of murder. And so then there's this kind of certain kind of prisons in the world, especially in the UK and in the US, they've got kind of this lock-up system, right? So the people have been locked up, and then for the period of their sentence, and then they'll be released. Yeah, but 60 to 80% of the inmates who go back to society fall back in the old patterns, right? Well, there's one prison in Norway, I forgot the name, but it was recently in the news, that actually they accomplished that people falling back after being in prison went down to 20%. And why? Because they deal the inmates much more differently than in other prisons. There's no lock-up system. They do yoga with them, they do some mind training with them, they let them kind of do activities people do normally in society. They engage with them as friends, right? So then they accomplish much more. So that's a sign that even a criminal can change the mind. And so if a criminal can change the mind with very kind of strong afflictions, then of course for us, it's also possible. Right? It's just a matter of time and applying the right kind of methods. So we see that those destructive emotions on the individual level, they cause kind of disturbance of the mind, they cause the mind to be unhappy, right? And they cause problems in society. So then that's we can see that those destructive emotions actually are the kind of cause for suffering to come about, as we classify it in Buddhism. Yeah? So that's reality. Yeah? So some people say, oh, those Buddhists, they talk about suffering and they must be so depressed. So, but actually, the more you know this reality, the less depressed you become. Yeah? The more you understand the reality as it is, then there's kind of problems, and we have to deal with those problems, right? So the more you understand that aspect, then of course there's more happiness, because you can see that the afflictions are cause for suffering, yeah. But those destructive emotions have all one very good quality, and that's the quality of that they can be eliminated. Yeah, afflictions can be taken away, and why? It's also a very important question to know. Yeah? So we have to see, first of all, there's a problem, right? So there's kind of suffering, physical or mental, yeah? Or problems in society. What's the cause of those problems? We can see it comes from the mind, right? So what kind of mind? These kind of destructive emotions, right? So negative states of mind, right? So there's a cause of a problem. The next question is, can we do something about it? If we cannot do something about it, then we don't need Geshe Norbu Center. Because if we cannot change the mind, then these kind of centers will not come into being. Because if the mind is not changeable, then it's called mind training center, right? So then that's not possible. So we have to know also the possibility for the mind to change. If you don't know the possibility for the mind to change, then we're wasting our time here. Then also if that was not possible, I won't be walking around like this and spend half of my lifetime in monastic institutions, So, but there's a possibility for the mind to change. There's a possibility to eliminate destructive emotions. So why is that? Why is that so? That's a very important question. If it's possible, if so, why? So in Buddhist, generally speaking, Buddhism, there's a lot of questioning. It's very important to question, not just believe what has been said. Analyze constantly, So that's the next question is, okay, we have a problem in life, in society, daily on our personal base, and we see there's a destructive emotion, right? That causes a problem. The next question is it possible to eliminate this cause? If you take away the cause, the result will not come into being. That's the law of reality. And so then you can analyze that these destructive emotions are not an innate part of the mind. As I said, it's like temporarily obscuring the blue sky, right? So it's true. I hope people are not angry at the moment, right? So that means that affliction, anger or aversion is not present at the moment. Yeah, that also proves that they are temporarily based kind of phenomena, right? They come up, they abide, and disintegrate. Yeah, so that's also an aspect. They're not an innate part of the mind, because if they're an innate part of the mind, they should be always present. It's also not the case, right? And another very important aspect is they're not in accordance with reality. So if you understand reality well, you can eliminate the wrong concept of reality, right? For example, a dream. If we dream, let's take a nightmare or a disturbing dream. At a dream itself, you believe 100% it's true, right? Then sometimes you wake up, and then although you're still disturbed, but you're in the waking, your mind is in the waking state. But because of the habituation built up in those few minutes of dreaming, it carries on in the waking state, and you still think you're still disturbed, right? Even if you wash your face and then drink something, you think you have to reason. Oh, that was just a dream, and then it takes a few minutes to reason. By the power of reasoning, you eliminate that wrong view or misunderstanding, and you go back to sleep, right? Or the famous example, I don't know, people travel by train in Sweden or not? Yeah. So if you're in a train and the other train is moving, but actually you think you're moving, you have the feeling in Sweden or not? Yeah. Sometimes at the bus also you have the feeling. But then you think, oh, we're moving. But actually it's not true. Right? You look like and you see that. And then you look at a platform and then you see, oh, we're not moving. Right? But the few seconds you believed it was 100% true. Right? So then when a person sitting next to you tells you, we're moving, right? You don't believe it anymore because you saw reality. So the same thing with destructive emotions. If you see reality as it is, you can not don't like to follow this destructive emotion. Yeah, people with a more positive, optimistic way of life, they won't fall that easily into a depression. Yeah? So if you understand reality correctly, you can change wrong views, right, by the power of reasoning. Yeah? And it's even true for destructive emotions like anger, anxiety. It takes time. Yeah? Don't think that within a weekend course you can change the mind and all destructive emotions be taken away. For example, if you attend today, tomorrow, and day after, I cannot guarantee you that you walk out here and you will never get angry again. So that guarantee we cannot sign that paper, because to change the mind, you have to think about years or months. Yeah, sorry, months or years, or maybe decades. It depends. Yeah, but it's possible. It's possible. One of my friends in the Netherlands, we started in 1993 with Buddhism, and he used to be in traffic every day. Traffic jam. And then he used to be very agitated, especially in winter with wet snow and people move very slow, and then there's another car just coming in front, and it's like, everything is a bit kind of depressing. So then he was sitting behind the steering wheel and he was just scolding about the person in front, just like really angry, But the person in front, he just has all his windows shut because it's cold, has the heater on, listen to some music, and doesn't even know what's going on behind him. So my friend in traffic just had his only suffering himself. He didn't solve the problem of the traffic jam, neither harming the person in front of him, right? So you can see he only was having himself. So that's only kind of a state of state of the mind. Yeah, maybe later. Questions? Yeah, it's okay. So I will first, let's talk for another 10, 15 minutes, then question, then a break. Yeah, it's okay. So then this person, after some time doing trainings, I think it took him quite some years though, but then now he just says, I just laugh about it, because he cannot change this kind of situation in traffic, right? Shantideva said, one of Indian masters, he said, if you have a problem and you can deal with the problem, the methods to solve it. Why worry too much? Just do it. If you have a problem but you cannot solve it, then also why worry? Deal with it mentally. It's a very interesting comment. Very interesting. It's very easy comment, very logical, but very difficult to put into practice. But when you can put it into practice, then amazing. Because to another kind of thing in relation with the Tibetans, who, not all of them, of course. Not all Tibetans are perfect. That's also I have to say. But many Tibetans, they follow this kind of mind science, right? So that also proves, and it's been proved by Daniel Brown from the Medical School of Harvard, that among the Tibetans, the concept of post-traumatic stress disorder almost doesn't happen. And it's very interesting to see that they are imprisoned and tortured and on the edge of death for not a few months, but sometimes for years, right? So if you have an average person in the West having experienced that for a few months, there's of course a physical kind of medication is needed for all the harm being done in torture. But also then he needs to depend on different psychologists, and mentally a lot of damage has been done that has to be taken care of, right? So in this case, many cases of the Tibetans, almost no post-traumatic stress disorder. Very interesting, because they know how to deal with the mind at the time of very difficult kind of situations in life. Very interesting. One of my own classmates, also in the monastery, he went back to Tibet. Of course, he wants to see his parents and his family, right? Why not? Right? That's average person in the world likes to have the right to see family and friends and everything. So he went back, but he knew already there was a danger, to get imprisoned is to find out that, he is studying in India and received connection with His Holiness Dalai Lama, or received teaching, etc., etc. Anyway, he went back, and then he spent a few weeks with his family, and then he was a few months imprisoned. And then he came back, and then he said, yeah. I said, how was it? And he said, yeah. He said, yeah, I spent few weeks with my parents. It was nice. And then the Chinese beated me up a little bit for a few months in prison, and I got out of it. Now back in India, and I rest for a few weeks, and I come back to the studies. You could see there's no mental kind of difficulty at all. Very interesting. Yeah? So that's true that those emotions actually they be in control much better. Mental states. Another example to prove that is kind of Paul Ekman. Paul Ekman is a person who I think is a world leading person in behavior science when it comes to facial expressions. So Paul Ekman pinpointed down about 10,000 different muscular differences in the face of people all over the world. Yeah, the people who are living in the forest in New Guinea to people in New York, everywhere. So he related our facial expression in related with emotions, And for an average person, maybe talk about difficulty in life or whatsoever, you can see in the face, right? People change, yeah. And that change seems to stay for quite some time. Especially the more severe the problem is, the longer it stays in the face. So then Paul Ekman met His Holiness Dalai Lama, having seen, I don't know, thousands of faces. Then he said, I never seen a face like this before. Very interesting comment, because a trained person, of course, His Holiness Dalai Lama has kind of said thoughts about, the Tibetan case and then, people being imprisoned in Tibet and losing a lot of people. And so there's sadness there, but then it doesn't stay. There's no kind of grasping to this kind of afflictions or problems or destructive emotions, right? And it goes away straight away. So that's kind of spontaneous. Yeah, when we have a problem, we grasp to that problem, and we make it like a mountain or make it big and huge and concrete and be the only person who has this problem, nobody else, right? So that's a sign that the more we see things concrete in that way, the more difficult it will be to solve it. The same with destructive emotions, right? So that's why we have to know that problems in life, as well as those destructive emotions, they temporarily, as I said before, they're momentary changing. They come, they abide for some time and disintegrate, right? And they can be taken away by the power of particular kind of contemplations, as we saw in the OCD kind of problem. Yeah, so by mental training, you can deal with those issues. Yeah, so that's a very interesting point of mind science or philosophy behind the psychology in this kind of presentation. So we have to go first to kind of self-awareness. Yeah, so we have to kind of understand what appears to the mind, right? How it appears, and just examining. It's like a scientist observing a particular phenomena, right? We actually, as scientists, right? We analyze how things come up in the mind and how it abides, how it disintegrates. Yeah, so that's aspects of our mind we have to examine. Yeah, so based on that knowledge, we can apply a kind of mind training that leads us beyond those destructive emotions. Yeah, so that's a possibility to solve the problem, so to say, by power of mental training. Because why do we do this kind of mental training based on reasoning? Because destructive emotions like anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, they have the same kind of structure of the mind that is based on reason, but not really a valid one. Yeah? When we get angry at a person, then we say this person is bad because of this, or this situation I don't like, because of this, right? So we overestimate the faults of its object. We only see one aspect of the object, and then mental fabricate it even worse than it actually is. And then your friend comes and pats you on the shoulder and says, no, come on, this person also has this quality and does this well and that well. You say, no, not true, right? You won't like to believe that aspect of reality. Yeah, so that's a kind of how this destructive emotion actually colors what we perceive. Yeah, so that's a few things there. And then another very important aspect to things we have to talk about when applying the antidotes is this concrete concept of I am me. Yeah, that actually is a cause for the problems to arise. Yeah, so that also you can see that a very selfish kind of motivation, which is based on a concrete concept of I am me, that is a cause for many afflictions to arise. Yeah, so how can we prove that? Yeah, that's also, first of all, from an experienced point of view, I say to you, please get angry, everybody. then it's very difficult to get angry. Yeah. But if I say, oh, you look like this, or you behave like that, then the ego comes up and then anger follows very easily, right? So that proves that actually this kind of destructive emotion is based on the kind of concrete concept of I am me, or ego, or kind of egoistic, kind of selfish kind of state of mind. Yeah. So that's also been proven by the same researcher from Harvard Medical School, Daniel Brown. There's a research been done, very interesting research. They have people, there's a few interesting research, but one of that, they have people in conversation, yeah, with the observer, and then the observer just counts with a counter the amount of words related with I am me, I, me, myself, my this, my that, So if you study linguistics, then you know what's been expressed relates with how things we behave or how we think, right? So if you study language in different countries and cultures, you can see why certain things in a culture make more sense because of the way they use the terminology. Very interesting. So how we express things verbally actually reflects how we think, right? So that's in linguistics, you can study those aspects of verbal and mental relationships. So they just, in this research, they just calculated very simple research. Just let people come and have a 10, 15-minute conversation and then count the amount of I, me, myself, There was actually a rap group called De La Soul. We had a song, Me, Myself, and I. I don't know if you heard maybe before. It was from my time. Yeah, I was young. Yeah. So anyway, this research actually, they pinpointed down the amount of me, myself, and I kind of expressions, right? And then you have the data, it's very scientifically. You have the data of a few hundred people. Then you ask them to look at the health records, and then you relate. You put statistics to it, and you get a kind of conclusion, right? So then they came to the conclusion that people who has a higher score in self-concern, they have also a higher score in higher blood pressure, closer to getting heart diseases and depression, low self-esteem. Very interesting, very interesting. Because from the Buddhist perspective, psychology, we say similar things. We say from the point of view of what we call ignorance, this concrete concept of I am me, all other problems originate. So it's very interesting research, very interesting. Yeah. So and there's many things like that, like people verbal abuse over Twitter, for example, being researched. A very easy way to get a lot of information, and then you just relate how people verbally abuse a person over Twitter or SMS or whatsoever, and then you relate to the health records. So you can see that actually negative states of mind not only influence the mind in becoming more unhappy, but also influence physical kind of states. Very interesting. So if you can, with mental states, if you can cause the brain to change, as we saw, right? If you have mental states, you can cause a physical kind of change, then of course with mental states you can change the mind, right? That's very evident then. Yeah? So that's why the few things to prove that we can change the mind. So if you know the problem, you know the cause of the problem, and you know it's possible to solve it, then the only question that's left, what is the method? How can I do it? Right? So that's what we call about mind training. Yeah? That's kind of the thing how we can actually apply different kind of mental trainings to solve the problem. Yeah? So that's a few things as a short introduction of the introduction. Yeah, you had a question?
Yes. I have a question about...
oh, no water.
Oh. Yeah, is it on? Yeah. I have a question about your expression when you talk about eliminating emotions.
Allez, on.
Yeah, my understanding I've been working as a psychologist and read some of the literature on emotions is that when you try to apply some kind of direct control over emotions, for example, if you have anxiety and you try to push away anxiety, you end up with more anxiety. So when you talk about, I wonder if you could clarify what you mean.
Allez, on. Yeah.
Because the way I've understand
Yeah.
it. So like you can't apply that kind of direct control over emotions. So my question is, when you say eliminate emotions, do you mean like you could handle them differently? You could see them for what they are, sort of disidentify, stand back from them, and then they will appear differently to you? Or do you actually mean directly eliminate them so they don't appear at all? Do you see my question?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is
how do you eliminate them?
Yeah.
Then my question.
Yeah, that's then you have to stay a bit longer than today probably, because it's not that easy, but possible, right? So first of all, it's not something that's suppressing things or something like that, right? It's kind of transformation. You transform the mind. That's what we do, right? But because suppressing by it is also no good. Yeah. So by transforming the mind, then you prevent them from coming into being in the future. Yeah, so as we can see in psychology, like you probably heard about the same like a decade ago, then there was this kind of thing, oh, you have to release the like anger or something like that, right? So you could pay a few $100 and then or euro and then do this kind of release kind of weekends, and you could punch a pillow, you know, or if you pay a little bit more money, you could throw a TV set, you know. So there's this kind of yeah, to release your anger, so to say. But actually, they came to the conclusion that it's not really working, because the more you habituate your mind to that pattern of getting angry, the stronger that affliction becomes. Because the more we habituate our mind to a particular pattern, it's much easier to generate it in the future, right? So that's why we can see the same thing. The more things we engage in on a daily basis, that influences our dreams, right? So that's kind of habituation pattern. Yeah? So what we do is not to suppress it. Yeah? We try to transform it. Yeah? So there's a variation of different techniques to tackle these kind of destructive emotions. To see the reality, same with the train example, same with the dream example, by the power of reasoning, you can prove the reality, and then that wrong view of the train is moving or what I'm dreaming is true doesn't arise, you know? So that's by the power of reasoning. So that same is true for my friend in traffic, yeah, who was very uptight initially, and then by the power of reasoning, be able to not get angry, right? So it's nothing to do with suppressing, and that is only to do with transforming the mind. Same with OCD case, a person who trains his mind or her mind in this particular way, yeah, from the point of view of neuroscience, it can be, I mean, there's different kind of interpretations, right? Many interpretations about how actually those neurotransmitters are being released and how you can influence that. Yeah, so there's a lot of things to be said about that aspect, yeah, because that's a very interesting matter for us. If you're in psychology or in Buddhist science or in neuroscience or whatever, it's very important to understand how does that process functions. So what we do is try to control the mind to prevent this destructive emotion from happening in the future by the habituations of something, a mind that opposes it, right? For example, if you see reality, you reason the platform is there, so our train is not moving. That's a reason. By the power of reason, you don't believe in the wrong understanding that your train is moving, right? So that's same with a dream. You use reasoning, oh, it's just a dream, it's not reality. Yeah. Same with this problem with OCD, that they learn to train the mind to focus upon constructive way of thoughts. And then the negative way of thoughts loses their potential to become manifest. So that's the kind of transformation process. If you understand the faults of a destructive emotion, then you will be able to have less interest or less being overpowered by it. Yeah? So same with a person with an addiction, right? A person with an addiction of drinking or whatsoever, or drugs, the more the person is convinced about the faults of that particular addiction, the easier it will become for that person to look for means to get rid of it, right? So it's very much, yeah, reason-based kind of, mental training in that regard. Yeah. So, and then if you train in this habituation pattern, for example, you like a situation A or you dislike situation A, or you like person A or you dislike person A, right? There's two minds. Yeah? So to like person A, yeah, cannot exist at the same time as you dislike person A. Maybe one day you like the person, tomorrow you don't, but at one particular moment, one particular state of mind, yeah, one particular second or whatever small moment you have, only one of those types of consciousness can exist at a particular time. So the more you habituate your mind to the positive aspects, liking person A, then disliking person A cannot become manifest. There's the power of habituation. Yeah, so by the power of that particular habituation, you can tackle, you can tackle or transform, so to say is a better term, those destructive emotions. Yeah, so that's a kind of, but it goes much more with it than just this aspect. Yeah, so if you relate with neuroscience, with the research of Jeffrey Schwartz, it's very interesting research done together with his friend called Henry Stepp. So Henry Stepp is into quantum mechanics, quantum physics, and he actually applies the law of the uncertainty principle of quantum mechanics into brain activity. Very interesting. His theory is not 100% accurate according to quantum mechanics, but it's a very interesting way of thinking. So what he says is there's many ways of the release of neurotransmitters. So one aspect is the release of calcium ions in very small calcium vessels. So the calcium vessels are on the quantum level, which is very, very subtle. So then Henry Stepp says, because it's on the quantum level, so you should apply the law of quantum mechanics. So most neuroscientific research are still based on Newtonism of physics, right? So if you apply this particular theory of the uncertainty principle, very interesting, then you have this release of neurotransmitters, and it's just a probability of what the person is going to do or not, either washing their hands or going into the garden, right? So the more the person causes mentally, which we saw from this case of Leonardo DiCaprio, right? By training the mind, you can train to generate more this kind of release of neurotransmitters going to the garden. So the more probabilities there are in that direction, then washing your hands will actually lose this potential to choose from. So that's why actually they prove in that way kind of free will. Very interesting research. Yeah, but it's not 100% accurate according to, but it's very interesting kind of way of thought. Because that's from the Buddhist point of view, it's very similar, I think, because we have all kind of probabilities, right? That's possible. And it's just just a kind of how do we deal with those probabilities and what do we choose? And that we can train with mental training. So that's a temporary release, right? So then the ultimate release, right, the second of your question, is that if you tackle this ignorance we just talked about, this ignorance of thinking about I, me, myself, right? If you get rid of that understanding, that goes much more subtler. Then you need much more time to explain that. So if you take away that kind of aspect of our, mental fabrication of reality, then afflictions don't arise anymore. Full stop. So that's what we call in Buddhism called nirvana. So there's a state. If you can, if you use a little bit of logic, if you see that the afflictions are not an innate part of the mind, they're temporarily there, right? They're not in considered reality. So with the correct form of mind, you can counteract that by reasoning. Based on those forms of logic, you can prove that actually those destructive emotions can be taken away, right? And the more habituation you have, there's many other interesting aspects to it as well, but just to keep it simple, the more you habituate yourself to the real understanding of reality, then those afflictions, they don't really have building blocks, to grow. So then this kind of ultimate elimination of affliction and nirvana can be achieved. But that's, if you just want to subdue your mind, getting less angry, let's say you now get angry for a few hours, then you go down to an hour, and then you go down to a few minutes. That already is a time frame of a few years, right? It's not, you cannot accomplish that within a few days, right? So if you have that time frame of a few years, then to get rid of all these afflictions, then you can imagine it takes a bit longer. Any other question? Not? People need a break, or need to use a toilet or something, or maybe you have. Let's say. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you because you.
Suppose that if you come to that stage that you feel that you don't have the afflictions anymore, do you have to be like how to say, like a guard that they don't come back again?
Allez.
or will they be,
Yeah.
say, subdued for
Forever?
No, I understand that. Might be.
Yeah, I mean, basically, yeah, this goes much beyond the discussion of today, tomorrow, and day after. But yeah, it's true. You don't create causes for afflictions, so you don't create causes for kind of contaminated states of existence, as we call it. So if you don't have causes for contaminated states of existence, then there's no cause for a reason to come about, right? Same if you have a seed and you put a seed here on the table and you prevent, you know, the conditions from coming in to let it grow to a plant. That's one aspect. But if you destroy a seed, right, even if you give all the conditions, yeah, the external condition of heat, moisture, fertilization, then it still will not grow, right? So that means if you cut this kind of ignorance, if you get rid of the root cause of the problems, then the problems won't come into being. So, and that's what we call nirvana. It's kind of ultimate state. Yeah. But it's a bit more complicated than what I just said in a few sentences, but it comes down to, yeah, that kind of idea. Yeah. Yeah, so we have a break, for, let's say, 10 minutes we need? Or stretch your legs and, yeah. Fresh air. 10 minutes, yeah? 10? Okay. 5, yeah, what is it? 20, 25, yeah. Yeah? Huh? Huh? Yeah, sure.
Topic.
Yeah.
I studied Tibetan language for
Oh, okay.
quite a long time.
Oh, here.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Sanskrit and Tibetan.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know that Sanskrit was the third level of the Tibetan. So I had to
Yeah,
look that
actually,
up.
Tibetan comes from the Sanskrit, right? Yeah.
But now I kind of, how to say, kind of lost it.
Oh, is it?
Do you know? Now a lot, I can still read the.
Oh, okay. Oh, very good.
But I have to, you know, when you don't, how to say, anything in the practice.
Yeah, you lose it, right?
Do
Yeah.
you know those days in the realm of internet? Do you have any suggestions?
In
for any
internet, I don't
online,
know. I'm very old-fashioned kind of traditional guy who studied the traditional way, so I don't really know. Online, there must be all kind of things available, but I don't know.
Where would you go if you would spend some time to study Tibetan?
If you really want to be serious, then you have to dedicate time, right?
Yeah.
So how much time do you have?
Two teenage daughters.
Huh?
I have 2 teenage daughters.
Ah,
Yes,
yeah.
I would say it's a bit limited.
Yeah, that's not much. Yeah, because to be honest, I mean, you know yourself, right? To learn a language it's a big, big investment. Yeah, so yeah, if you just want to stick with a classical one,
Yeah.
then maybe online you can find something in relation. Light and a bit warm, and so water is fine, no problem. So yeah, I don't know what's available online. I'm quite new to the Western world.
Oh, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, so for me the Western world is quite new actually. Just getting used to it now.
How long did it take for you until you felt like you could speak more fluently?
In Tibetan, I did very intensively. I studied a little bit of classical in the Netherlands before I went to India. And then I studied in Dharamshala. Oh, sorry, maybe put this on. Yeah, back again. So, yeah, we talked about these kind of things of self-awareness, self-discipline. Yeah, so that's kind of a structure. First, you understand and see how the mind. It's like a mirror, you know, like a scientific kind of observation. So, when you check your mind, yeah, you don't make sure that's a clue in this kind of process. You make sure your mind doesn't get overpowered by the affliction, because if the mind gets overpowered by the affliction, then you lose it, right? You lose the clarity. That's what happens when affliction becomes strong. The clarity of the mind goes. The way to analyze goes. There's a reason, but the reason is not very kind of. There's no clarity. There's mostly incorrect reasonings being done based on the afflictions. So that's why people like Daniel Kahneman, when they did kind of like a few years ago, this kind of emotional intelligence was kind of very important movement, right? So the more you know about the mind, and the more you are, observe the mind, and you're more in control, right? So now a new thing of Daniel Kahneman is also this kind of focus. You have to be able to concentrate on a particular aspect. So these things of mind science has been proven to be very constructive, because a surgeon who has to make decisions sometimes in operations, right? If the mind is not clear, if there's an disturbance of a negative thought, it can cause kind of damage, right? Yeah. So, and same the same things have been examined with schools, colleges, yeah, people even up to a few departments of the New York police force. They've trained in these kind of patterns of emotional intelligence, because they have to be very clear in their minds, otherwise they make a wrong decision in very difficult situations. And so then my friend in prison in Bangalore, he was not in control, so he made a wrong kind of act, yeah, based on being disturbed. Yeah, that's what it does with our mind. So we have to get, first of all, this kind of research. How does that affliction arise, right? That's kind of, you can maybe relate it to if you look at a person in the metro or you have metro, no? Yeah, yeah. And they also look, but they inside the phone, yeah. Okay, same as in London, yeah. Okay, so then if you see the person looking at the screen, right? You see their mind is in there. Let's say they're watching a movie. Sometimes they play this kind of fruit games, you know. It's very funny. So for me, it's very funny because I lived in a kind of quite remote kind of monastery, like let's say 20 minutes from a forest with elephants and tigers, and it's a very, very remote area. And I just bought a smartphone 2 weeks before I went to London, So we didn't watch much of the news. So when the people contacted me and told me about, oh, Brexit and this, Brexit that, and Brexit this, Brexit that, I thought, what is Brexit? So I had to do a Google search what Brexit was all about, So that's my knowledge of the Western world a little bit. Anyway, so yeah, so go back. So you have these people, their mind is inside the phone. Yeah. So let's take, they're watching a movie, right? So the mind is same as you watch a movie sometimes. Maybe your mind is in there, in the TV set or laptop or iPad or whatever you use to look at, right? And you want to see the end, right? That kind of feeling, Your mind is totally into it. Some people that walks by, and you don't really recognize there's somebody walking. You know that feeling? Yeah? So that's a sign that when the mind takes over, with an emotion, same thing. When the destructive emotion like anger takes over, there's no control. There's no clear thinking, right? So that's my friend in prison. It happens, emotional hijack. So now the clue is to analyze what's going on inside the mind. So as an observer, so you observe a particular event in your life. Oh, so how do you do that? By you see the person, and you see the person inside the mobile, inside the TV set, or that person is straight in there. You don't go to that extreme. You just see the movie, and you see the person watching, right? Without really going into the movie yourself. You know what I mean? So that's a kind of very objective way. Oh, there's a person and watching this movie. What's going on with his mind, and how is he absorbed? That kind of aspect. So in that way, you analyze your own mind. You see, you take an example out of daily life. You got disturbed, right? And then you analyze that. How did it feel? How did it create the cause? Was it a cause for happiness or was it a cause for problem or unhappiness, right? So it's very logical. Yeah. So you analyze actually if this destructive emotion, or let's first say it emotion, right? Like anger, yeah, is it constructive or destructive? Right? I think in Buddhism is a lot of things based on reasoning. Either things exist or don't exist, and what are the reasons for it to exist? What are the reasons for it not to exist? And then you actually see what's stronger, right? So same here. So you see this emotion, and then you see, okay, is this constructive or destructive, and why? What does it do in my mind? How does it influence my behavior? How does it influences the mind, right? So then you can make a kind of, just analyze it, like a scientist observing a particular phenomena, right? Because if the emotion takes over, then you lose the clarity of examining it. So from a distance, you like to observe. Yeah. So then you see the faults of the destructive emotions. Yeah. And you see it's not in accordance with reality. That causes my mind to be unhappy. I lose the clarity of thinking. I might say something wrong to another person, or maybe even physical harm. Yeah. So they actually analyze that destructive emotion is not any point of a benefit. Yeah. So then you see that as the one aspect, and then on the other aspect you apply the benefits of the antidote. Yeah. So you analyze, for example, antidote like practicing patience, right? So practicing patience is the mind is much more clear, mind is more calm, you can make the right decisions. Yeah. So practicing patience doesn't mean people can do whatever they like to you, right? That's not the real practice of patience. Practice of patience is a mental attitude, but you can act like a school teacher or father or mother, the children. They can say something to the children to correct them, right? They can even have a fearful outlook and say, you shouldn't do this, But inside, no anger, right? Inside, or a school teacher, same thing. Can be fierce with the students, but inside there's no anger. There's kind of a relaxed state of mind. It's just motivating yourself for that particular act, for the benefit of the person, right? So that's very interesting, how you can actually play with the mind, and then the outcome is much more positive. Yeah? So that you train in this kind of contemplation, seeing the faults of the destructive emotion, and then contemplating the benefits of the antidote, in this case, patience versus anger, right? So then it's kind of a mind training that actually get more convinced in the positive aspects of practicing patience, and more convinced in the negative aspect of anger. And then automatically, the next time you get angry, or not really angry yet, but the moment you start seeing it coming up, you have this kind of self-awareness at that time. You see, oh, anger is coming. And then you can still act. Then you can still prevent anger from coming manifest. By the power of reasoning, you see, okay, if I follow this kind of thought, it's not very constructive. I will get problems for myself and for others, right? If practice patience instead, there's more peace of happiness. There's a better kind of clarity of the mind that can solve the problem. It's a much more constructive way of thinking. So then you can still act. So the clue is, it's a twofold thing, right? You have to have this kind of awareness and this kind of self-discipline. Yeah, so this awareness we can get by power of concentrating the mind much more, right? And this self-discipline is kind of an analytical meditation. Yeah, so to contemplate with reasoning. Yeah, so the first one, the self-awareness, if you don't have that, as I said before, you don't get this kind of clarity like the lake in the Alps where everything reflects. Yeah, so that's the first step. Yeah, and also, same Daniel Kahneman's now new thing is next to emotional intelligence, now it's focus. And so he learns if your mind is focused, you accomplish much more in life, right? So he actually proves that by kind of an inverted U shape, So on one side he put kind of daydreaming, people not really interested in things in life, right? So it's kind of daydreaming. What we in Buddhist concepts we say kind of a little bit mental dullness, right? No interest, kind of it doesn't matter much kind of thing, right? And on the other side of the chart, there's kind of distress or depression, or we in Buddhism we call it kind of excitement, yeah, kind of the mind goes outward. And so in that inverted U shape, yeah, like that. So on the top, there's kind of highest productivity, And that's been proven in kind of, you know, in business, it's been proven in the work field, proven in education. The more your mind is concentrated or more focused, the highest productivity there is at that particular time. And the same in the Buddhist context of mind training, the more you're focused, the more you can actually change the mind. So it's very interesting that, that inverted U shape, the same in the Buddhist kind of context of mind training, the more you're focused, then the more capacity there is to analyze things properly. Yeah? Because if the mind is distracted all the time or there's no interest, then you don't improve, right? So if you really want to improve, then you have to know the problem, right? And you have to have a mind that is able or capable to analyze it. And in order to analyze it, if the mind is distracted all the time, then it's very difficult to analyze it. Same with reading a book, you know. If your mind is distracted and you read a few pages, you think, oh, what did I read again? You know, so there's actually a waste of time. So the more you're focused, the more you absorb at that particular time. Yeah, so that's not only a Buddhist thing, that's, even there was, Daniel Goleman mentioned in one of his presentations also, there was research been done in New Zealand, over many, many years. They checked students in college or university, I'm not sure. And then they got the data, how focused they were in their training as a student. And then I think 1 or 2 decades after graduation, they checked how they ended up in life. And they saw that actually people, this from a worldly perspective, right? It's nothing to do with who is happier or not happier. It's just kind of persons who were focused in school and then got all kind of very successful in life. And you can see, you know, managers who like more emotional intelligent, more focused, they can accomplish much more. And it's true, no? In scientific world, like especially in the world of psychology, we've seen that in the early days, if you're well intelligent, if you have a high IQ, right, you'll be very successful. Yeah, because you get a good education, you get a good job. Yeah, but actually now they see that's not enough. You have to be emotionally intelligent as well. And why is it so? Because if you are in a leadership position or wherever you work, we all social human beings or people in family life, if you don't know about your own afflictions or your own mind, you don't know about the emotions of others. Right? So that's why you have to learn your own mind by this kind of processes of self-awareness and self-discipline, right? And then you only know after that, know how others feel as well. Because you have to deal with people who don't come to most of the job. It's not their hobby, right? Sometimes if people's job is a hobby, it becomes very easy because there's in Dutch, I think is a saying, I'm not sure. If your job is your hobby, you don't have to work anymore. So it is kind of course, it's not for everybody the case, right? So in that way, you have to understand if people are happy in the workplace, then you can produce much more, right? So that's why you have to know how the minds of people work. That's why this emotional intelligence movement became very successful, you know? And that combined with this kind of focus kind of aspect. Yeah. So then if you know your own mind by the power of this self-awareness we talked about and how to apply the antidote, as we briefly discussed by this kind of mental training of analytical approach, right? So then, based on those two aspects, if we know the mind of others, then the kind of next step is empathy or compassion. Yeah, so that's the next kind of level of mental training. Yeah, so if we want to help others, then first of all, we have to understand our own mind, right? And in order to help others to achieve happiness, we first have to understand ourselves, how to achieve happiness, right? Same, if you have a problem in life and you solve that problem after some time, then when another person experiencing a similar kind of problem in life, it's for you easier to help that person than a person who never underwent that kind of problem, right? So here, same thing, yeah? So first you generate a kind of awareness, self-discipline, and then empathy and compassion. Yeah, so now compassion movement is also being quite popular these days, yeah? And especially compassion versus empathy. Yeah, so there's sometimes also some research been done also in the Buddhist context. It seems that the real genuine form of compassion actually brings much more happiness and is a very constructive way of mind. Yeah, so Yeah, from a scientific point of view, on one conference in Bangalore, I met Eve Ekman. Yes, she also had to give a presentation. And she's actually the daughter of Paul Ekman, I just mentioned, about the facial expressions. So she did a research of empathy versus compassion in the healthcare. Very interesting. So people would just have only empathy, as she defines it, as feeling the suffering of others. That's it, you know, feeling kind of how other people are suffering and also feel yourself a little bit uncomfortable with that, you know. So that's how she defines empathy. And then you see that people in the healthcare, especially nurses, people working in hospitals, who see a lot of suffering, you know, they actually experience it similar themselves. And there's kind of a lot of stress, burnout, you know, difficult. But if they train in compassion, constructive compassion training, if they not only see the suffering of others, but generate a wish to do something about it, it's a much more constructive way of thinking. And if you generate that wish, then she has proven in this research that there's less stress, there's less burnout, you know, because of this constructive state of mind. Very interesting. Yeah, so that's been proven in the healthcare kind of system of empathy versus compassion. Yeah, so how we define it in this particular way. Yeah, so that's why you can see if you have this kind of compassionate attitude towards others, yeah, then it's a much more constructive way of helping others to be liberated or be free of happiness. Or sorry, be free of suffering, right? Yeah, sometimes what I think here and what comes out here is different. It happens, yeah, sometimes. Yeah. Anyway, now I'm aware of it. Sometimes I'm not aware of it even. So, yeah. So then that means that we have this kind of awareness, self-discipline. Yeah. So then, if you be able to understand your own mind, it's also much easier to understand the mind of others. Right. So, and that's very important for us social human beings because we have relationships. We have to walk with people all the time. You know, you cannot walk out unless you live in a cave somewhere high up in the mountains, but there's always beings around you, right? So you have to deal with beings around you. So that's why this kind of importance of these steps, extremely important to our development of the mind. Yeah? So that's what we're going to talk about, kind of love and kindness, compassion, and reality. So those aspects are very important in this kind of mind training. Why? Because first we have to see what is the problem, right? So these destructive emotions. Then and everything related with these destructive emotions. Yeah? It's not only losing mental peace or being depressed or even physical and verbal results from it, as we saw in my friend in prison, yeah, and other people with verbal abuse, you know, based on this kind of fundamental kind of states of destructive emotions, right? So you can see that the root of the problem is not out there. Yeah? If a person like my friend in prison, he's a murderer, you know. But it's just a concept, you know. Actually, the real enemy is not this person. He's not a bad person. He has many good qualities as well. But it's the affliction in his mind that we classify as destructive emotion. That's the problem, not the person. So that's why I said what they did in this prison in Norway, very interesting. They work with the real enemy, not the person who's classified as an inmate or a person who is classified as a criminal. No. Inside his or her mind, there's this affliction that has to be treated. Very interesting. So you don't treat an individual person as such, but you have to treat the mind. Very interesting. And then you accomplish something. So that's why this prison in Norway, only like 20% of the inmates fall back to the same habits, compared to the UK is 50 to 60%, and the US is like 70 to 80. Because there's this lock-up system, right? So they treat the person as an individual, as a kind of criminal, instead of seeing the real enemy is within, right? It's in the mind. Very interesting. Yeah. So then you can see that our own individual problem is caused by the mind, and also to solve that problem also comes from the mind. Very interesting. You know. So there's to you a question about nirvana and samsara. So in Buddhism, we talk about all the problems in this cycle of contaminated kind of problems in birth, yeah, and during life, yeah, those kind of problems in samsara, they're created by this kind of destructive emotions, right? And You can get out of it if you eliminate or apply the antidotes. So we talked about on a temporary level with this kind of self-discipline, right? By using reasoning and to tackle or to transform those destructive emotions by seeing the faults and seeing the qualities of the antidote. Same a person with a problem in drugs, same thing. If that person is convinced about the faults of his or her addiction, yeah, and the benefits of being free of it, it's much easier to do detox. Yeah? One of my friends in London, actually, he does work for an organization who take care of the homeless. So he takes people from the street and try to detox them and then try to get them back into society. Very interesting. So the similar kind of techniques are being used to let them actually understand that a way of living at the moment is not very constructive for their life. So that's a kind of a mental process, which is not easy. Yeah, some people fall back and some people you can help. And so you can see in that aspect also this kind of mind training of self-awareness and self-discipline and focus about the faults of the problem and the benefits of being without a problem, then people generate interest in changing the mind, right? Same thing, if we don't know about our faults of our mistakes, then it's very difficult to change the mind. And most of the time, we always think, oh, I'm perfect, I don't have any faults. All the faults are with other beings, with others, they're out there, not here, out there, So that's how we mostly think, but actually it's not true. Yeah, because, as I said before, if you train your mind, yeah, because the person on this world trip, yeah, will go for traveling to the whole world, The mind is the same, so they never accomplish any happiness, wherever they go, right? But then a person in prison, for example, in these kind of circumstances with the Chinese occupation in Tibet, some of the people, of course, physically they get tortured, but mentally they don't really get disturbed. Very interesting. With the not existing, almost no existence of this post-traumatic stress disorders among the Tibetans. It's very interesting. So then you can see a lot of things actually happens or depends upon the mind and our mental attitudes and how to train the mind and how to help to become a happy human being, because we all like to accomplish two aims in life, and it is being free of suffering or problems and wanting happiness, right? So in order to accomplish that, we have to do something. Yeah? You cannot just sit and make prayers. That's that's good, but you have to be a little bit more constructive. Yeah? So you have to understand what is the cause of the problem. Yeah? So we see these destructive emotions. And next step is it possible to eliminate them? And then we saw for different reasons that those destructive emotions can be taken away by the power of these kind of reasons, right? And there's this temporary solution, yeah, as we talked about, by applying the antidotes. And the ultimate solution, if you take away this concept of I and me, that's same as that research. So everything that is related with I, me, myself, actually causes a lot of destructive emotion to come about. Yeah, so I refer to this research, or you people, but there's also other things, like if there's a showroom full of cars, new cars, and there's a young child throwing stones on those cars, right? You think, oh, that shouldn't be done like that, But if one of the cars, you signed a contract and you bought a car, and you see the same event, you will react totally differently. The cars is exactly the same. The child is exactly doing the same thing, but my car is there, So then the I comes up, and it's very interesting. It's very interesting. Even in China, it was the iPhone. Apple has these iPhones. So I think it was iPhone 4 or something. I'm not sure. But so this iPhone 4 was coming up the market, and the shop, a particular shop, I don't know where, it was in midnight China, but it was planning to open at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was one of the first shops you could buy this iPhone 4. So people, they prepared for that, right? So they needed this iPhone. It also says iPhone, right? It's very interesting. Very interesting. The commercial industry, iPhone, iPad, iBook. Yeah. Very interesting. So almost, not that they know about it, but because their own mind also maybe functions like this. Me, myself, and I. So anyway, so then this shop was planning to open at 9, and then it didn't open. It didn't open. And people waiting outside, and they didn't get their phone at 9 o'clock. And the people were thinking, I need this phone now. And the shop didn't open. So it was kind of an attachment, right? I need this phone, you know? So based on attachment, and attachment is like you overestimate the qualities of the object. Oh, this iPhone, if I have this iPhone, I will be so happy, you know? They think like that, right? So then my life will be so much better, you know? So then they don't get it. So the separation from that object of attachment causes aversion. So it's, believe it or not, but what was in the news at that time is they took stones and were throwing stones at the window shield of the shop because it didn't open and they needed an iPhone. So they transformed, actually not transformed, but actually that attachment was not being met, you know, the expectations. So aversion arose, and based on that they start getting angry and throwing stones. And they're very interesting, you know, because of this me, myself, and iPhone, you know, that you need now, you know, very interesting. So that's from a Buddhist perspective very interesting to see, because a lot of things are rooted in this concept of I and me, right? And the more concrete we see or how we let it appear, then the stronger the afflictions arise, yeah? And then the stronger the building blocks become for all the other destructive emotions. So if you take away that kind of concept of understanding ultimate reality, we're going to talk about, that's not 1 or 2 day kind of, you get understanding. Yeah. So when this Dalai Lama talks about emptiness, you know, then he says, when I was 16 or 17, I started to generate a genuine interest in emptiness, he says, you know. And now being, what is it, almost 7 decades, yeah, six decades later, you know, 84 now. So it's like, now I slowly think I start to understand it. So that's a sign that mind training is not that easy, especially when it comes to this understanding of this kind of, how that ignorance or the concept of I and me actually causes the destructive emotions to arise, as we saw in many examples, and the scientific research of you know, counting the words I and me related with health records. Very interesting, very interesting. So that's the same. The Buddha, already 2,500 years ago, taught this is what we call ignorance, and that's the root of all our problems. And that we have to deal with. And that, for that purpose, you have to understand reality. Reality of, you know, the real, how things really exist. And then you come down to very close to what the people say in quantum mechanics, you know, that there's nothing concrete to be found among the objects we perceive. You know, nothing exists from its own side. Everything is in the nature of dependent origination. Very interesting. So that's already, the Buddha said, because of this kind of ignorance of grasping at this kind of concrete, inherent or true existence, because of that, then afflictions arise. Because of those afflictions or destructive emotions, problems arise, and there's suffering. So if you really want to take away suffering, yeah, you can apply the antidotes on a temporary level, but on an ultimate level, one day you have to get rid of this ignorance. Yeah? So if you take away this ignorance of this concrete aspect, also all on a daily basis, it's true, you know, all our problems we see so existing from its own side, big, unchangeable. Some people even say, oh, I have to experience it, I cannot change it. You know? That's not true, because everything is in the nature of dependent origination, right? We can change. So that's true for all our problems in life, that's true for our own mind, you know. If you put some effort, then it's not like a physical body, you know, like the athletes every 4 years in the Olympics, they change the world record with a few split seconds. That's it. That's the limitation of the body, right? But with the mind, it's a totally different ballgame. The mind is kind of, yeah, much more can be developed if you want to, if you're interested and you want to put some effort. So on this temporary level, but if you can understand, if you really understand this reality, and this concrete I and me doesn't appear anymore, then all the destructive emotions don't arise. And then that's only peace of mind, right? It's only constructive way of thinking, reality. So that's a kind of teaching of what we call the teaching of ultimate reality, or sometimes be defined as emptiness, or, you know, the law of dependent origination. So that's a very interesting, one of the most interesting kind of subjects within Buddhist philosophy, I think, and most important one, but also most difficult one to be understood. Yeah, so that's because the habituation, you know, if a habituation to an affliction is stronger, the more difficult it will be to eliminate it, right? Yeah, so that we can see also people, my friend in London who takes care of these homeless people, the longer they're living on the street, the more difficult it will be to bring them back in society, you know? So the stronger your addiction or the stronger your habituation to something negative or destructive emotion is, yeah, the more difficult it will be to change, but not impossible, right? So it's still, because of this potential, as we saw, the mind is changeable, right? We saw it with examples and we saw it with logic that, you know, those afflictions are not an innate part of the mind, so it's possible. Yeah, so based on this kind of aspects of mind training, we can have kind of self-awareness, walk to self-discipline, and based on those aspects, we can also have compassion for others, right? To help others to achieve the same. Yeah, if you undergo the problems yourself and you solve them, then you can help others to do the same, right? So that's kind of, yeah, in the very secular aspect of how we train into compassion as well. Yeah, so maybe if there's questions, then we have questions or no questions? No? It's getting late. People walking today, maybe? Yeah. Any questions? No? No? Okay. So, yeah, then it was maybe a very simple presentation, I'm not sure. But yeah, when it comes to emptiness, then it becomes a bit more complicated. But yeah, this is a kind of very brief summary of the Buddhist part of mind science, the Buddhist part of psychology, and how to train the mind, yeah? How to train the mind leading up to and including the constructive forms of compassion and love and kindness, and then reality. Yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about in more detail in the coming days, to get a more kind of grasp of what actually is this kind of training. And then also we will going to do some meditations according to that. I was thinking today, but there's still not that much time, and people may be tired from the day, so maybe then people fall asleep instead of doing constructive meditation. So that's why. Huh? Yeah, maybe tomorrow, because it's almost right. Yeah, then maybe better, people fresher, and then then we'll go over how to actually train in this kind of self-awareness, how to generate a mind that is able to concentrate, right? There's one meditation we call placement meditation or concentration meditation, and then on top of that, you learn also how to do this analytical meditation. How actually do we change the mind? Yeah, by the power of a kind of an analytical approach. Yeah, it's a very constructive way of mind training, and how to extend that to the far extent of helping others to achieve the same, with compassion, and to relate all those things back with kind of how things actually exist, and whatever exists or whatever appears to our mind, is it also in accordance with reality or not? And if not, how does it create causes for problems? So that's a very interesting and needed kind of understanding of reality in order to become a happy human being, right? So that's basically, I think that's why we're here. I'm not sure, but that's probably why we're here. Because we all want happiness, don't like suffering. So that's the kind of concept to a certain extent, we came to maybe to a conclusion, I don't know. When I was young, I had the same thing. I was a university student and going to parties all night long, and you know what people do, and then just start to realize that actually what you're doing is not giving 100% satisfaction, right? It's not kind of real kind of the essence of life, I think. Anyway, that's a question for yourself maybe, but there was a group in the Netherlands called Doemar, and they had a song, Is Dit Alles, meaning, is this everything? Very interesting. But only after I became a Buddhist, I start to understand to the meaning of it. Rolling Stones, I can get no satisfaction. You too, I haven't found what I'm looking for. So even certain kind of, pop stars, to a certain extent, they thought about things in a way that, maybe it can be of interest, right? To at least, motivate your mind in the possibility of finding more satisfaction in life, what brings more happiness, right? So I think that's why we're here as human beings. Yeah. Okay. Then maybe we stop here. It's 9 o'clock. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you very much. Yeah.
I just want to say briefly also, if any of you feel inspired now to do Saturday and Sunday, so this Friday talk is actually included. So if you're already paid for the Friday, just drop us an email so then we can make sure that you get a discount for the weekend, so you don't have to pay twice for today. But otherwise, yeah. So you're still very welcome to sign up for Saturday and Sunday, or one of the days, if you're interested to learn more. You give a teaser, and then now people hopefully need to figure out the methods.
Yeah, that's my job, you know.
It's like, it's a good sales pitch. You give
Yeah.
like, this is what we're going for, and tomorrow I will tell you how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, one evening session is like, you cannot do much, right?
Thank you so much for coming, and hope to see many of you tomorrow and Sunday. And thank you so
Yeah.
much, Geshe.
Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful teaching.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.